Well, hello there. Thank you for joining me for the latest edition of Telile 24/7. I'm your host, Adam Cook, and we've got a busy show for you this week, touching on several aspects of life here in Richmond County. Later in the program, I'll have a special feature about trails in the county and the delicate balance between all-terrain vehicle users and people like pedestrians, cyclists, and others in terms of developing multi-use trails in the community of St. Peter's. We'll also tell you what could be happening to a former school building in western Richmond County. And to start things off, here's a story about a recent partnership between Richmond County and the town of Port Hawkesbury concerning the thorny issue of providing fire service protection to the people and industries of Point Tupper. A recent contract was reached, and it's a lengthy one that will take in the two sides' needs and concerns while making sure that Point Tupper is kept safe for the next 10 years. Here's some more details right now. The cost for the first year of the new deal will see $60,000 spent by the county on the town's volunteer fire department. That figure will escalate by roughly $1,000 a year for the duration of the contract. Speaking at last week's regular county council session in Arishat, Richmond Warden Amanda Mumberket spoke of the necessity of striking a deal that would look after the interests of residents and heavy industries in Point Tupper.
We looked at just about every option that was possible. We consulted with industry partners and other municipalities across the province, trying to learn from best practices. But the reality is, as we've, as we intrinsically knew, but as this confirmed, this research, Point Tupper is it's a unique situation because of the existing highway connections, because of the location of the fire departments in the region, and because of the mix of industrial and commercial and residential taxpayers in that region.
What we were looking for was an agreement that made financial sense for all parties, that took into safety, obviously, had to be a top priority. But, it's also a huge boon for us to be able to say there's stability in that fire service provision when we're talking with our industrial partners who are there now and who, new businesses that may choose to locate there in the future. This is no longer an issue that they need to anticipate as part of their safety protocols that's going to keep cropping up year after year after year. That costs businesses uncertainty, time, and money. And we're really pleased that we were able to come to such a long-term agreement. When you think about fire service provision in the rest of Richmond County, they're not wondering year after year after year, well, where will my fire service coverage come from? And so it's wonderful that we've been able to provide that same sort of certainty level, or nearly the same certainty level to the people who are in Point Tupper.
In the joint press release, Port Hawkesbury Mayor Brenda Chisholm-Beaton commented that the proposal from Richmond Municipal Council regarding Point Tupper Fire Service was close to a similar proposal put forward by the town last spring. According to Warden Mumberket, that common ground allowed both sides to strike a longer-term deal than those that had been reached by previous county and town councils.
Without question, from our council's perspective, we were looking for long-term. We hadn't really defined long-term when we started to get into the discussions and doing our homework. 5 years definitely was what we had on the table. But as we were in discussions with the town, representatives from the town, we started to talk about length of time, and we were able to come to an agreement of 10 years, which I think. I think it was like the lights went on, and it just honestly that time period I feel like just made the whole thing easier to negotiate in the end, because everybody wants that long-term solution.
The goal for both parties, and we said since day one as a council, is that we wanted a fair solution that would prioritize the safety of businesses and residents in Point Tupper, but also one that would promote business growth and development, and that will be financially sustainable for us and for Port Hawkesbury now and in the future. And it needed to ensure that Richmond County would not be burdened by an agreement that didn't make sense. And the same for the town, really.
The new 10-year contract puts an end to a period of instability and often heated debate between Richmond Council and the town of Port Hawkesbury. In the past 3 years, Richmond has changed its main service provider for Point Tupper 3 times, going back and forth between the Port Hawkesbury Volunteer Fire Department and the Lewisdale In-District Volunteer Fire Department. To that end, the representative for both Lewisdale and Point Tupper, Melanie Sampson, offered her thanks to the Lewisdale volunteer firefighters for their service over the past year and in previous years.
We want to, say a special thanks to the members of the Lewisdale and District Fire Department for stepping up and taking care of fire protection in Point Tupper last spring. In true Richmond County fashion, they generously answered our call for help. And always assured us that they would be there for us if we needed them, and we appreciate that immensely. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank the Port Hawkesbury Fire Department for also agreeing to take on, it's a very, as our warden has said, a very unique and valuable area in Richmond County, and in the region in general. And so, I think, as the councillor for District 3, I thank them very much for taking us on.
However, the deal is also drawing some criticism. Warden Mumbercat confirmed at last week's council meeting that some concerns have arisen regarding the length of the contract and the appropriateness of council devising a contract that could outlive their own council terms. Here's how she responded to those criticisms.
What if it's not sustainable in the future? If something happens with industry, or there's a change in major change in the tax base, and so we did talk about that. There's a volatile global market out there, the pandemic. So, of course, any agreement like this, I want to assure everyone that is going to have some kind of an out clause, and that is something that was discussed and both parties agreed to. And the specific language hasn't been determined yet, but like the deal itself, would likely be related to assessment, considering a loss or gain by either party. And of course, that type of information will need to be determined and referred to our legal, our solicitor, and that person will be making sure that we're not bound into an agreement that doesn't make sense in 6 years' time, right? I've also heard some concerns about making commitments past our terms as elected leaders, but as government leaders, we were elected to make strategic decisions that are in the best interest of taxpayers, and many of those decisions are not going to be restricted to within our 4-year term. We've seen that in previous councils. You see that in councils everywhere. I mean, everything from, infrastructure investments to staffing to strategic planning. There are always going to be decisions that we are going to make that are going to impact the next councils to come and past the end of that 4-year term, and we have to have a longer vision than that.
My experience has been that the constituents in Richmond County are paying close attention to the decisions of their municipal council, and so I am happy that those kinds of questions are being asked, because I'd rather them be asked and answered than people left worrying and wondering about that.
As a further example, Warden Mumbercat pointed out the contract between Richmond County and the municipality of the District of Guysborough for that municipality's landfill to accept solid waste from Richmond. That's a contract lasting 25 years.
And there's no possible way to meet those types of infrastructure and service requirements without expanding past the 4-year term. And frankly, it is what those are the kinds of decisions that we were elected to make. And, I guess I would just reassure the public that none of those decisions that we are making are happening without a lot of attention to detail. We are doing our homework, and it's the reason we weren't in a position to resolve this in December. It has taken us a few months to really understand and the complexity of the issue, and to be able to find some creative solutions. We'll all sleep, I think, a little bit better at night, knowing that the people in Point Tupper can call for that service and have the quickest possible response time.
Now, if you've been watching Telile regularly, specifically our Richmond Council coverage and Telile 24/7, you might know that there was a recent request for emergency funding put into the municipality from the Dr. William B. Kingston Memorial Community Health Centre in Lordways. The health centre has struggled over the past year since losing one of its 2 physicians, resulting in a drop in revenue that had it eating into a $30,000 nest egg that was put away for things like building maintenance and repairs. So now the centre is looking for $3,000 in emergency funding from Richmond Council, and also hoping that the municipality will work with the health centre to try to develop a long-term strategy in case a doctor doesn't come immediately. So how did this all play out? Well, let's take a look at the council footage right now. The discussion at last week's regular council meeting was sparked by an appearance at March's Committee of the Whole meeting for Richmond Council by the chair of the board for the Dr. Kingston Memorial Community Health Centre, Juanita Mumbercat. At the time, Mumberket confirmed that the departure of one of the centre's 2 physicians just over a year ago has left the Lordways Area Centre in desperate financial situations to the point where $3,000 of emergency funding would be needed for the month of March alone just to be able to help the centre get through this portion of the spring. Following up on the situation at last week's regular monthly meeting of Richmond Council, Richmond CAO Don Marchand confirmed that he had spoken with the county's Chief Financial Officer Jason Martel and other members of staff concerning the possibility of continuing to investigate potential financial aid for the Kingston Centre during Richmond's budget deliberations, which are just getting underway as this broadcast gets to air. At the same time, District 5 Councillor Brent Sampson, whose constituency includes the Kingston Memorial Health Centre, gave a further description on what the fate of the centre could be if emergency funding and potential follow-up funding from either the municipal or provincial level is not made available. Sampson and Warden Amanda Mumberket outlined the situation for their fellow councillors.
If some help wasn't found, which ideally is going to, come provincially, we don't want this to be a long-term thing from us by any means. Probably less than a year, maybe in the range of 9 months before they may have to shut their doors, depending on how. That's if all goes well.
If nothing went wrong, but also if a doctor isn't attracted to the clinic, because that is obviously going to change
Correct.
That will eliminate the problem, essentially,
If there was no sort of unexpected costs that came up in that next 9 months, if everything went. If they weren't able to attract a physician or make some kind of an agreement with the province, that's probably the maximum timeline is that 9 months. Minimum, hard to say, just because you don't know what may happen.
However, the Kingston Centre's request for $3,000 in emergency funds was still a concern to District 3 Councillor Melanie Sampson. While the councillor stressed that she didn't want to prevent the Kingston Centre from being able to carry out its various duties, she suggested that more study was needed on the issue, particularly on the definition of emergency in terms of emergency funding.
As I was at the last meeting, supportive, of course, of the Dr. Kingston Memorial Clinic and the work that they do and the need to keep them viable. But I'm still concerned about the precedent setting, and I'm a bit concerned about the true need of this money in this moment.
In the end, Council voted 3-1 in favour of the emergency funding for the Kingston Memorial Health Centre. Councillor Melanie Sampson was the only nay vote. However, while Warden Amanda Mumberket defended the decision to go ahead with the emergency funding, she stressed after the meeting had wrapped up that this was a very specific one-time situation for a community health centre, as opposed to opening up the floodgates for non-profit groups to approach the council for emergency funding.
Yeah, for sure, Adam. And I want to be very clear that Municipal Council is not interested in getting into the business of providing operational funds to nonprofit organizations. It's absolutely not on our priority list. It's just not possible. We don't have the resources to do that. This is a special case. The Kingston Health Centre provides service to constituents across the county. Ms. Mumberket presented some excellent information on both the economic impact and the health and social impact of the programs that they've been delivering. I think it was over $1 million in grant funding attracted in the last several years. So I think, you could see the concern from council that, we can't, this is too big an issue to just leave to chance. And so I think that's why you saw the majority support for that. But, to Councillor Melanie Sampson's points, there wasn't really an adequate amount of detail provided in the information that we got. And it's not to say that the Kingston Health Centre didn't provide good information. We just feel like we need a little bit more. And maybe that's, and the only way that that's going to be achievable is if we have staff work a little bit more closely with them, and if council will have a chance to review that. And I think it's a good question. What does constitute an emergency? When you hear the statement, well, if nothing goes wrong, then we can make it until, for another 9 months. But I mean, the odds of nothing going wrong, as you know, these days are pretty well zero. So it's, it is is a big concern. I think, it was a good outcome here this evening, but I would also absolutely agree there's more homework to be done.
Let's stick with healthcare for just a moment, because there's a development that's happened in the case of the Cape Breton South Recruiting for Health Committee. That group set up shop a year and a half ago to try to attract new doctors to our region, and they may be looking at a former school building in western Richmond County to try to get that job done. It's the former West Richmond Education Centre in Evanston, not far from the Straight Richmond Hospital. According to committee members and members of Richmond Council, that former school building could be a key part of the plan to bring doctors to our region. Let's hear Richmond Warden Amanda Mumberket explain what exactly is going on and how the building could be used for the Recruiting for Health Committee.
Essentially, this item wanted to add to the agenda as a result, in part related to discussions at the Cape Breton South Recruiting for Health meetings, and just the concept of trying to make the hospital location a more attractive place to be able to attract physicians to, and have other activities going on in that region. And so conversation had been taking place around, whether or not we could have a bit of a joint, maybe a discussion at the CBSRH group related to this piece of infrastructure, if maybe a bit of a task force could be established to investigate what options might be, what might exist related to that school and its usefulness alongside the hospital.
I would just be interested to hear from CAO Marchand, because I know when we originally were sort of updated on county items when we were first sworn in, it was certainly a topic of conversation, and I know there was some issues with the land and our ability to do anything with it because maybe it was still being migrated or something. So I'm just wondering if perhaps there's an update, also the condition of the building over the past few years.
Our legal people believe that there are only a few more documents left to record, and we're looking at likely we're hoping to have a migration date by the end of March. So once that's done, then we'd be looking at potentially making a decision then regarding the fate of the school. However, I mean there are possibilities there, and we could, as a staff, get some more information. I mean, when the school was handed over to the county, there were some reports done and some assessments done of the building and the grounds and the interior. So. Although it has gone into a state of I wouldn't say disrepair, but it's been a while since anything has been done to it. So it would be wise to maybe get someone to go in there and evaluate what potentially might be a cost associated with sort of bringing it to a point where it would be people would be able to go in it. We know there are some serious issues. There have been some windows broken and some heating issues that have plagued the building. And of course, we all know what happens when there's no heat in a building. So it would be a wise idea to perhaps get staff to maybe investigate some costs.
So perhaps that information, sort of circling back to Warden Mumberket's thoughts here about creating a bit of a task force between the Cape Breton South Recruiting for Health group and then the county. Perhaps if we did create such a task force, then staff could report to that committee to just discuss the condition and then what the options might be for that group, right? Because I think depending on what the condition is, it will determine sort of where their thoughts, I suspect, will go with the property.
I guess I would prefer that staff provide a report to council. And then council could basically take it from there.
While Deputy Warden Michael Digdon and Councillor Melanie Sampson both expressed the need for proper examination of the West Richmond Education Centre school building to be done, each of them differed on the exact people who would be required to be able to carry out such an investigation.
I guess we've already lost the boat where where the building, again, like other structures, are costing us money now that the heat has been either turned off or the building not checked when the heat went out. I just feel I feel maybe it might be more appropriate if it needs a furnace or if it needs heat, then we call for a burner technician to give us a cost, and if it needs plumbing, we get a plumber to cost us, as opposed to getting an engineer to go in and recost that, the whole evaluation of the building and costing us more money, where we can, honestly, if somebody's going to quote on repairs, and get, submit for quotes, and that way it's not costing us anything.
Councillor Melanie Sampson.
The nature of my motion really was more to just have someone go to the building, walk around and just gather a list, you know? The furnace isn't working, there's 5 windows broken, like just really a basic list. I wasn't really thinking about costing at this point, because I think first we'd need to see the scope of work we're talking about before we would even, in my opinion, entertain the gathering of quotes and that large quantity of work, because we may just find that there's just so many parts that are broken that it may not be fixable, right? So the nature of my motion was simply to have staff gather information on the condition of the building, to just give us a report of what they see when they're there.
In the end, council seemed attuned to the attitude of District 1 Councillor Sean Sampson, who stressed the need for the municipality to take care of its aging infrastructure, including buildings such as the West Richmond Education Centre property that had been turned over by other entities, such as the former Strait Regional School Board.
You all know how I feel about the West Richmond School. Again, when we look at the strategic plan from 2019 to 2024, page 49 as infrastructure planning, and a picture of the school, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, yeah, you know where I feel with that, and we gotta invest in that building, or at least look at doing something with it for sure.
Following an update on the former school property at last week's regular council meeting from Richmond CAO Don Marchand, Councillor Melanie Sampson, whose District 3 takes in the former school property in Evanston, suggested that the budget deliberations for Richmond County might be the best time to look at different options for the building, including municipally funded upgrades and a potential sale of the building that would require an environmental assessment process.
So to me, what that sounds like is whether we decide we wanted to develop it, or we wanted to declare it a surplus and sell it off, we're probably going to need to do this kind of work. So my recommendation would be that we, refer to budget deliberations to, consider setting aside some money to get that work done.
Last week's regular monthly council meeting for Richmond Council in Arishat had a bit of a milestone to it. It was the first time in many years that there's been more than one public question period at a Richmond Council meeting. You might recall that back in January, Council voted unanimously in favor of having a second question period closer to the introduction of Council's Committee of the Whole report. That would give members of the public the chance to be able to speak to items that came up in that report before they went to a vote. However, at the same time, Council also voted to have a separate question period near the tail end of the meeting to concentrate on items that weren't part of Committee of the Whole. That finally came together in the March meeting, so we're going to talk about that for just a couple of minutes, and we'll ask Warden Amanda Mumberket to explain why it took so long between the passing of the motion in January and the latest regular council session in March to finally have 2 public question periods.
I think that was, probably us getting used to how the meeting flow was going to be working, right? So when we made those decisions, it was very early on in our term. I think it might have been the first or second meeting. And so it took us a little time to sort of get a gauge on, what's the quantity of discussion looking like after that initial question period. And we see like evenings like this evening where it's quite a lot. There have been times when it's not. So maybe not so much of an issue. So I think with any change, it's good to check in after a little while to see how it's working. And so that was a learning for us, I think, was to, adding that second piece in, and I think giving people will have more opportunity to ask questions. And I firmly believe, and I think Council, you saw their support for this as well, that having a question period prior to that Committee of the Whole is fantastic. I mean, we had some excellent comments this evening from people who were concerned about what they had heard at the last Committee of the Whole. They had an opportunity tonight to come and provide their comments and ask questions before the actual committee of the whole report was passed, and that is the purpose of the question period. So it was really, like, it couldn't have been better timing to have a review of question period on the agenda on a night like this evening when you saw it at work. The committee of the whole question period, that's gonna remain at the end. It'll be unrestricted. So that idea generation, that new, those kinds of sort of blue sky questions can still come to the council table. But then at our regular council meeting, we'll restrict that flow a little bit more. So the first question period is related to committee of the whole items, and then the next one is just regular agenda items outside of the committee reports. And, I think the more opportunity you provide for people to provide their comments and ask their questions, that the more engagement that we're going to have. And so now that we've kind of got that under our belts, and we'll test drive this for a little while, I think the next step will be we'll set a procedure for enabling the public who can't be with us here this evening to submit their questions in some sort of either advance or within a certain deadline, so that we can, even if they can't be here, they can still participate. And that's especially important. I think of the constituents in Councillor Brent Sampson's riding, there's a lot of them that would be driving well over an hour to get to a council meeting, to spend, 5 minutes asking a question. It'll be really great to have them, to give them an opportunity to participate in a different way. And that would be the same for people with mobility challenges, or just because of the pandemic restrictions, we can only allow so many folks in the chambers. So that'll be the next thing that we tackle for sure.
We're going to spend the next few minutes here on Telile 24/7 talking about trail systems, particularly the trail system between the communities of River Tillard and St. Peter's in eastern Richmond County. That's because Richmond Council recently got a request from the East Richmond ATV Riders Association for a letter of authority that would help them to be able to develop this trail as a multi-use trail. Now, that letter of authority doesn't give the East Richmond ATV Riders Association ownership over the trail by any means, but it has caused serious discussion at Richmond Council in March, both at the committee of the whole level and also at the regular council meeting. We're going to hear in just a few minutes from a couple of St. Peter's representatives who are concerned about the balance between ATV usage and pedestrian traffic, cyclists, and others who want the trails just for them. But at the same time, we're also going to hear why Council wanted to give this matter serious discussion at the Council level. Let's begin with Richmond Warden Amanda Mumbercat explaining the original letter and the intent of the letter from the East Richmond ATV Riders Association.
The section of trail that we're talking about is owned by the provincial government, and the East Richmond ATV Riders are going to be seeking a letter of authority to upgrade and manage that section of the trail as a multi-use trail. They're modeling their efforts after the Celtic Shores Coastal Trail, which runs along the west coast of the island. I think is about 97 kilometers from Port Hastings to Inverness County. The key, though, to this small stretch of trail is that it will connect to the wider multi-use trail network, so that it becomes a destination like the Celtic Shores Coastal Trail, and so that the commercial district of St. Peter's becomes a premier stop or launch pad along that destination trail. With these upgrades, we can anticipate that the trail will become more widely used with prevalent signage, and there's already there's always the concern that how will this be policed to make sure that you don't have ATVs going at excessive speeds, and that the bottom line is that with a more widely used trail, gates to slow traffic and to increase safety, and trail users essentially become the watchdogs of that type of public infrastructure. Several association members in this region have already taken what's called a trail patroller course. So they wear a vest. They're by no means the law, but they are they're visible. They have a responsibility to report when issues arise, and they also are a resource for first responders should that come up. But in general, the community of users becomes the watchdog on the trail. And that model has been used successfully in other areas where multi-use trails run close to communities' homes, roads, etc., which would be the case here. The main concern is that the railway bed is eroding at 3 significant spots, and it's steadily getting worse. It's going to need armor rock work done before it's lost to the community, and I do know there's a community group in the village now looking to do some stabilization on that piece of trail, and I commend them for their efforts because it absolutely needs to be done. However, that stabilization, in my mind, as much as it is needed, to me, it's not the end of the discussion for that trail. When you're talking about the potential economic development around it, the business community has come out strongly in favor of this designation to multi-use. And several community groups have also provided letters of support in that regard. The East Richmond ATV trail riders do have a history of trail development over the past 2 years. They've been working on upgrading trails along the rail bed, including installing gates at entrances with barricades, signage, all of the things that you would come to expect of a multi-use trail that meets that standard, that type of standard. They've spent in excess of $120,000 in doing so, and they're now ready to move forward with new projects, specifically with this section of the trail. So I wanted to bring this to Council for discussion as an initiative that I think would be extremely beneficial economically and socially to the community. I would also like to say very clearly that I am 100% in favor of walking trails as part of a wider trails network in the county. I think that we need a really strong mix of multi-use walking trails, cycling trails, to make sure that we're providing residents with the active transportation options and the recreational options that they need and that they're entitled to. These things are directly connected to our quality of life. Living here in Richmond County has its benefits, and it would be wonderful to see this kind of integrated trail network exist in our county. And the bottom line is that because the trail is on a specific section of rail bed, by virtue of the fact that it is a former rail bed, it makes it more suitable for a multi-use opportunity as opposed to trying to establish brand new trail to do so, because you have that pre-existing infrastructure.
I'm familiar with the section of trail you're talking about. I've used it in the past, both walking and cycling, and one thing I can say is beautiful stretch of trail, definitely underutilized.
Mm-hmm.
The times I did go on it, you rarely met anybody. Looking at the model in Inverness County, it's fantastic. I'm familiar with it outside of this. I think there's definitely opportunity there to have a multi-use trail. It's not just about one thing, but right now the way it is, in my opinion, it doesn't seem to be getting its full potential. And I totally agree. I think this could be a big difference for even the businesses in St. Peter's, and for connecting people from different parts of the county, travel one end to the other, and be able to stop in and support some of the local businesses.
So, municipal councillors in Richmond County voted to take the request from the East Richmond ATV Riders Association for a letter of authority regarding the River Tiller to St. Peter's Trail and vote on it officially at their next regular Richmond Council meeting. However, at that council meeting, 2 St. Peter's residents raised concerns about the idea of giving more authority to all-terrain vehicle users in terms of how the trail would be used and whether it would still be safe for those who were using it as a walking trail and those using it for cycling. We'll hear from former Richmond County Councillor Claire Rankin in just a moment. First, here is longtime St. Peter's Trails advocate Mark Vanderhoden.
There has been a couple community groups working toward having the trail repaired with it should be used for this or it should be used for that, mm-hmm. Right?
I think I included that in my report.
Yeah, so part of the trails, we got some subsidence issues. It's falling into the ocean. Yeah. The trail has been maintained by Department of Lands and Forestry for over 30 years now, and that was my past job. That's I worked there, right? So that was kind of my ballywick was that trail. And so at the time in 1988, it was there was a petition to have the government set it aside as a walking trail to connect the canal property to St. Peter's Provincial Park and that trail system. So that was done, and this kind of predated ATVs. So when you see all these ATV groups taking over CN rail lines, this predated that. So anyway, it's been like that for over 30 years. They have maintained it. I understand, my understanding at least is that Lands and Forestry, the provincial government, whatever you want to say, would love to download this piece of property to the municipality or a community group or something like that, right? So that's a decision that maybe you guys are going to have to ponder on, because trails are kind of a they are a constant money thing, right? So this is a coastal trail, and I'd be concerned about turning it over to a small community group. To me, it's the province. You got 1 million people chipping in to maintain stuff like this. You turn it over to the county of Richmond, and it's 8,000. So that's just a point there. So I guess I would just hope that in your deliberations that when you look at supporting one group or another, that you, like particularly when it comes to ATVs, is there a reason that they can't find another way into town? I don't think there's anybody in this room that would say that we don't want to see ATVs in St. Peter's, because we do, right? I don't think there's any big business plan for it. I think it would be a convenience. It would be nice for friends who are visiting maybe to be able to zip in and grab a coffee at Tim Hortons, or to get a bit of gas or whatever. There are alternate routes that we've looked at, and that could possibly get us right into the garage, and right into 3 or 4 restaurants. So there's possibilities there. I guess, from a personal point of view, and I think it's the feeling of the group I've been working with, is that it's a green space. It's one of the only places we have where parents can take small kids for walks and not worry about traffic, right? We have sidewalks through St. Peter's, can't do that, right? Little kids, that type of thing, right? It's just not going to happen down, in other places. So this is a green space. It's an active transportation link. And I guess we would like to see every other possibility be explored before we start saying that we're going to allow motorized use on it. Because what is motorized use? Is it ATVs? Is it dune buggies? Is it dirt bikes? You've got a whole line of properties. People. You're in the village of St. Peter's. You've got a whole line of properties there. You got a couple beaches. It's being heavily used now by people more so than ever because of COVID. And so I'd just like you guys to kind of keep that stuff in mind when you're making decisions about the trail. I mean, it would be my wish that you change the motion to supporting. We have a letter of support from the village of St. Peter's to seek funding where we can to repair the trail. We have a letter of support from Potlatech First Nation to fix the trail, right? This isn't talking about use or who can use it or not. It's just let's fix the trail. And then, future use is going to be future use. I mean, that's going to be public consultation or whatever. But right now, it needs to be repaired. And if we don't do it soon, we're not going to have a whole lot to talk about, right? It'll be in the ocean.
So I'm not against ATVs. I have one myself. I bought it for the rink, but I have one, and I just think that motorized trails are just not the way the world is going. I mean, the Department of Transportation in Nova Scotia was recently renamed the Department of Active Transportation. Your neighbor to the west, Port Hawkesbury, has an applications out to put $2 million into their trails, active transportation trails. Last week, the federal government came out with a $400 million fund for active transportation. You guys were all elected as a new voice, a new broom, etc. And I just think and hope that you look at things differently and look at a new direction, the way the world is going. I mean, past councils have spent over $160,000 on the trails in Richmond County. And when you divide that by the number of bikes or 8 off-highway vehicles in this county, I bet you've subsidized those people to probably $200 to $300 each. This trail that we're talking about, it's a real natural spot. I wish you'd all have a chance to to walk it. It provides only 5% of Nova Scotia's coastline is available to the public, and this is part of it. You know, it's the only 5% of Nova Scotia can a tourist or anybody else stick their toe in the sand or wade in the Atlantic Ocean, and that this trail is part of it. And I just think it has a much more potential as an economic stimulus for tourist attraction and for active transportation in Richmond County. And I'm going out on a limb here, but I'd ask you to consider tabling that motion until you get more information yourselves.
Following Rankin's remarks, Warden Mumberket ceded the chair of the meeting to Deputy Warden Michael Digdon, so she could take on her role as councillor for District 4, which includes the River Tillard to St. Peter's Trail, and address those who were concerned about its future development, given the potential for a letter of authority to be approved for the East Richmond ATV Riders Association.
I completely understand your perspective. I guess, and the concern that I'm sure the province would like to download more and more infrastructure off of their own plate and onto others. There is a case, though, to be made where we've seen, obviously, the success of that model happening in other regions. And again, I would point to Inverness, where that kind of work has gone on. I did want to make sure, though, that the folks who asked questions were aware that the business community, that I've been speaking to, they do see a clear business plan for this, and there's been no, like the motion from council was specifically multi-use trail. It's not motorized trail only. So that active transportation link that you're talking about, I think is hugely important. I would agree. I think we agree on a lot more than we disagree on, for sure. And in terms of, access to the coastline, this trail would, I think, enhance that access. You'd have more users, of different types able to access it. And in terms of, trails where we don't have to worry about traffic, I really do firmly believe that we need a strong trails network. We talked about that last time at the Committee of the Whole, and that has to include walking trails as well as multi-use trails. So I just wanted to mention those items because I specifically wanted to make sure that folks were aware that the business community has definitely been consulted and has expressed a desire for this.
However, Rankin then returned to the council table and suggested that the comparison of the St. Peter's Trail system to the Cayley Coastal Trail system in Inverness County wasn't appropriate.
This trail is only 12 miles long. Inverness is 90 miles long. There is a consultant's report out that was commissioned by this body, by the county council, and he said that the trails of Richmond County, I'm paraphrasing because it's 65 pages, the trails of Richmond County are for recreational use only. And he has a good point. He says the people on the Ilmadan can't get off the island. The people on the east can't cross the canal in Lordways Way. And the people in the middle can't, cross the canal either, but also can't cross the 104. So I would like to see the economic plan that says somebody from Truro, Halifax, Moncton, wherever they come from, is going to come down here, plunk their trailer in Grand Anse and drive 12 miles into St. Peter's and then back and then go home. I mean, this is not a trail that lends itself to overnights or long trips. This is 12 miles long, and I think it's just for local use only.
The comments of Rankin and Vanderhoden struck a chord with Richmond County Deputy Warden Michael Digdon. Even though he himself is an all-terrain vehicle owner, he expressed concern that ATVs might have a negative impact on the River Tillard to St. Peter's Trail.
I guess hearing what I've heard tonight, I personally feel that maybe we should table the motion until we get a little more detail on the trail, and according to Mr. Rankin, maybe we get a little more detail of the landowners. If there is a trail on the opposite side, then it might be something that we could look at. I do know that we look at a multi-use trail, and we assume that it's going to be used for walking and ATVs and everything else. And saying that, and I personally own one and own several ATVs, will dominate the trail over people walking, and it will stop people from walking down that trail eventually.
In response, Warden Mumberket and Councillor Brent Sampson told Digdon that this hasn't been an issue in other areas and that they're confident that a balance can be struck between River Tillard and St. Peter's.
I've walked it in the past, jogged it, and taken a bicycle through it, and it is a beautiful trail. I always felt it was underutilized, though. Like you rarely meet anybody on it when I did use it, and it seemed like kind of a waste the way it was. I think this has been going on a long time. There's been, groups wanting to get access to make this a multi-use trail for a long time. And if it was quite simple to extend a secondary route into St. Peter's, it probably would have been completed long ago. Whereas this probably makes the most sense.
In the end, Council voted 3-1 in favor of writing a letter of authority for the East Richmond ATV Riders Association, with Deputy Warden Digdon casting the only nay vote. Following the meeting, Warden Mumbercat expressed some optimism that a new era of cooperation could ensue, allowing the trail system to become part of renewed tourism opportunities for St. Peter's and the surrounding area.
Where we are seeing success in trail development is in places where there are strong networks of trails that include multi-use, trail use, that link to commercial centers, and also, good networks of walking trails. Mountain biking trails are now becoming more and more of a topic. So I understand the trail strategy that was done some time ago. Had certain recommendations in it, but at the end of the day, times change, and we've got groups now talking about a multi-use canal-to-canal opportunity, and that is what we call a destination trail. Not every trail is going to be 90-some kilometers in length. Trails can only become tourism destinations when they are linked to other locations. But right now we're seeing volumes of people trucking their vehicles to the base of the Inverness Trail and heading up, and some go all the way to Inverness, some don't. But the bottom line is it became a destination because it is multi-use. And it's like I said, linked to commercial centers that you can access. And that is to me, that's a really key piece. I would absolutely agree that if you're looking at it as a single sort of, it's 12 kilometers of trail, and then, it's not, that's it, right? If it's not linked, then we have a problem. But there are new opportunities for dealing with geographical obstacles like, rivers, and we've seen the bridge that was created over River Tillard, and, so there are opportunities, I think, that exist now that potentially didn't exist before. And so it's, and again, multi-use trail does not prohibit active transportation. We've seen quite the opposite. I mean, the bed of these multi-use trails is so accessible. I've seen wheelchair use of these trails, and equestrian riders, and you name it, right? So that's what we want to encourage. It's not about limiting access to coastline or limiting access so that it's motorized only. This is about increasing access for everyone. So that's kind of the vision that I've heard coming from groups who are interested in it being multi-use. I will tell you, in my previous life as the executive director for the Chamber of Commerce, there was no question. The business community was talking to us about this. They see the business case for this. They see an opportunity for winter-based tourism. If this trail and is changed to multi-use and is planned as a destination trail, and I think that's we have to start somewhere. The rail bed is uniquely. Trails built on a rail bed are uniquely positioned to be able to host a multi-use trail because of all the infrastructure that that already exists in them. And so, really pleased to hear, and I was aware that there was several groups in St. Peter's working on the trail stabilization. I've been part of those conversations, and I'm. Regardless of what it's used for, absolutely, we need to stabilize it right now because it's at risk of erosion. But you have to ask yourselves, why is it at risk of erosion? After 30 years of maintenance, as a walking trail, I would suggest that maybe that's not the kind of maintenance we're looking for. We need a commitment from government and from the groups to do a better job of making sure that trail is not lost.
So is it the provincial government's responsibility, specifically Lands and Forestry, to get involved in that kind of trail reworking? The issue brought up earlier this evening by Mark Vanderhoden about community groups having these things offloaded on top of them. Do you feel that's a problem?
I understand the concept that as local communities, we don't necessarily want to be in favor of the province downloading responsibilities. But when you've got well-established community groups who are looking for a letter of authority, and we see them we've seen them ask for letters of authority to cross municipal lands, or you've got a precedent there of a group that's with the ATV riders. They've invested, I think, something northwards of $120,000 into that trail system so far. They're in it to win it, and they have a vision of creating like I said, that destination. So I think that mitigates a lot of those concerns, and keeping in mind that the letter of authority doesn't grant ownership. It just grants that management piece, right? And so that's what council was interested in supporting, was to see if we could take that to the next level in terms of our overall tourism strategy. So.
But the eastern side of Richmond County wasn't the only spot involving all-terrain vehicle users that was dealt with recently by Richmond Municipal Council. Here's Warden Amanda Mumbercat explaining an application by the West Richmond ATV Riders Association to provide an extension on a contract signed with the municipality a year ago.
They were granted an amount of money to execute a project, and they've emailed asking for an extension on the 2020 Richmond County grant. They've cited lack of availability of the proper equipment, as well as some difficulty getting the equipment to them to complete the trail work needed. And so that has been one of the biggest setbacks, I think, during this past year for them to be able to complete the project.
So my understanding is that they were issued a grant for the trail, right? And so the grants are issued based on a specific project, right? And so ideally, and I think the requirement was, as you access to be approved for the grant money, you need to spend it all before the end of the fiscal year. But the reality is that from time to time, things are going to come up. But these things will happen from time to time. On any kind of infrastructure project, you potentially experience delays. And so this was just I think a pretty routine request to extend the deadline so that they can get the work completed when the snow goes. And that's just not going to happen before the end of March.
And that wraps up this week's edition of Telile 24/7. Thank you for joining me this week, and a big thank you to my Telile colleagues Becky Bourinot, Nick Boudreau, and Cora LeBlanc for their assistance with the production and formatting of the footage from Richmond County's Committee of the Whole meeting and last week's regular council meeting. Of course, if you have any suggestions or ideas for future reports or interviews that we could do here on Telile 24/7, or just some comments on what you've seen in the past hour, we'd love to hear them. You can reach me directly. My phone number is 902-625-8863, and you can email me. The address is adamjrcook, cook with an E, @gmail.com. You can also contact Telile directly. The station phone number is 902-226-1928, and you can send emails to the address info@telile.tv. Don't forget to follow Telile on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Our YouTube channel features every single episode of Telile 24/7, including this one, as well as separate stories and interviews from the individual shows. We also have every single episode of our sister French series, Notre Côté, and a lot of brand new interviews and programming that my friends at Telile have been putting together in recent days, touching on everything from literature to politics to music, so make sure you check out Telile on YouTube. And if you'd rather just listen to what Telile is up to, our podcast channel is up right now at soundcloud.com/Telile. For now, I'm Adam Cook. Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks' time with a brand new episode of Telile 24/7. Take care and happy Easter. We'll talk to you soon.